An impenetrable vault is cracked by an ingenious plan. The losses are spectacular, and the mastermind becomes a folk hero, even to those he robbed. Every summer, Europe's elite flock to the French Riviera to soak up the Mediterranean sun. They spend their millions in the lavish casinos, exclusive boutiques, and world-renowned restaurants that adorn the coastline. The affluent citizens and tourists safeguard their wealth in the vaults of the area's banks. One of the oldest and wealthiest of these fortresses is the Bank of the Société Générale in Nice. Monday morning of July 19th, 1976, started like every other weekday. Minutes before 9 a.m., the officers of the bank went to open the main vault to release the money for transactions. The vault not only held millions of francs in currency, but 4,000 lockboxes. But the inner door proved stubborn. It wouldn't open. The 75-year-old door had been stuck before, and a few drops of oil had always solved the problem. Inconvenienced customers waited with the assurance that their money and valuables resided in one of the most secure spots in Nice. After all, the steel door weighed more than 20 tons, and the walls around the vault were a foot of reinforced concrete. By 9:30, a representative from the company that had manufactured the vault arrived to work on the lock mechanism. He went through the unlocking procedure again and again. With each try, the tumblers moved freely. The lock worked fine. Nevertheless, the door remained stuck to its frame, and no marks showed that the door had been forced. By 11, frustrated customers began to worry. They wanted their money. They wanted to get to their valuables, and nobody was telling them why they had to wait. Anxiety rose all around. By noon, bank management made the decision to break through the side of the vault and see what was jamming the door. The crowd outside grew larger and more impatient. By 3 p.m., the workmen created a small hole through which they could peer inside the vault. The impossible had happened. The bank had been robbed.
Every high-ranking cop in Nice showed up. They knew without being told that this was really an important crime and that the imagination of the world was about to be stuck on it for a long period of time. Anyway, all these cops come in, the customers are still locked out in the street, and the smallest of the detectives present was told to go through the hole and make sure that the criminals were not still inside.
The detective found papers and documents covering the floor, and among the litter, he saw equipment the thieves used to break into the vault.
And he says, and wait until you see what's written on the walls. And what's written is, ni arme, ni violence, et sans haine, which was translated in English without arms, without violence, and without hate.
A quick survey of the vault revealed how the thieves got in and out. A hole opened up to a 30-foot tunnel. It led to the city's underground sewer system. From the quality of the work and the amount of evidence left behind, the police surmised that more than one man had been responsible for this. They were hunting for a gang of thieves that quickly became known as the Sewer Rats. The thieves had left behind 2,500 pounds of equipment inside the vault, more in the tunnel and sewer. The police retrieved 27 acetylene cylinders that had been used to fuel blowtorches. There was venting equipment to bring fresh air into the tunnel. Investigators found a half-mile of electrical cable, as well as waterproof flashlights. The wholesale plunder of the Société Générale made international headlines. The bank offered a $250,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the Sewer Rats.
They began to bring in detectives from all over France. The amount of work the detectives now were faced with was staggering.
Authorities estimated that the mysterious thieves had stolen some $10 million in currency, jewelry, and precious metals. At the time, it was not only the biggest bank robbery in world history, it was, as heists go, a French work of art.
The police knew that it was done by real professionals. The loot itself and the means used to get it made the investigators realize that it was the heist of the century, and that expression would impose itself on everyone.
It took 12 detectives 4 days to catalog all the vault's contents, but they never found a single usable fingerprint. Police first suspected that it was an inside job. They began interviewing present and former bank employees. They also had to question the thousands of lockbox holders, and they still had to trace back each and every piece of equipment the Sewer Rats left behind. The heist of the century was being followed by the investigation of the century. It was not only a frustrating amount of work. The criminals investigators sought were becoming folk heroes.
I think the principal emotion of the detectives at this time was rage at the people who were laughing at the crime, laughing and applauding at the crime, who went around talking to each other and instead of saying hello and goodbye, they would say, without arms, without violence, without hatred. The detectives couldn't stand that.
While logging the evidence, an officer spotted red chisels. It wasn't the first time he'd seen chisels like this. Days earlier, during a routine search, this same officer saw identical chisels in the possession of a known criminal, Daniel Michelucci. At the time, there seemed nothing particularly suspicious about Michelucci's activities. So the officer let his car pass, but not before making note of what he saw. Nice detectives spread Michelucci's name to police throughout the region in the hopes that someone would report back with more information. A lead came from a small village where 2 police officers had encountered Michelucci only weeks before the break-in. A woman had called the authorities to report suspicious activity at an empty villa in her neighborhood. When officers arrived, they found a group of men waiting outside. They provided reasonable proof that they had permission to hold a party at the residence. One of the partiers had been Michelucci. Days after the crime, the villa visit paid off.
They got a phone call from an informant interested in the 1 million francs reward from the Société Générale. He told them, "You know the people you've checked at the villa? These are the ones responsible for the heist of the century."
Nice police scoured the premises for evidence. Among the items they collected, there was a watertight flashlight, similar to those found in the vault. Dried mud caked to the bottom matched that found in the sewer. Finally, the police had a starting point. Detectives met with the prosecutor, convinced that they had stumbled upon members of the sewer rats. But investigators felt that none of the suspects so far had the skill to put together this operation. They decided to put them under 24-hour surveillance. The next big break came in early October when two men tried to cash gold ingots at a local bank. The teller processed the serial numbers of the ingots and saw they matched those stolen from the bank. She notified the police, and the two men were arrested. Authorities added Alain Bournat and Francis Pellegrin to the list of potential sewer rats. Police began rounding up suspects in hopes of forcing the mastermind to the surface. Through the weeks, the list had grown to include relatives, contacts, and accomplices. All were brought in for questioning. In France, police have the right to hold any suspect in custody without legal counsel for 48 hours. Many criminals crack under the grueling two-day interrogation known as garde à vue.
Somebody gives the police a name, and they go to arrest a 44-year-old photographer in Nice, and he says, "What? Me the brain? You're crazy." And the cops must have felt despair close to it, because he did not fit the profile either, and he certainly sounded innocent. His name is Albert Spaggiari.
Bonjour, que puis-je faire pour vous?
Nothing but the confession of a petty crook suggested Albert was a criminal mastermind. From all appearances, Spaggiari lived a simple life as a photographer in Nice. Friends knew him as a charming romantic who was above all loyal, especially to his wife Audi. The couple preferred living in the country, where they were restoring an old farmhouse. Once he was arrested, a battle of wills began between Spaggiari and the police detectives. For 36 continuous hours of relentless questioning, Spaggiari stubbornly claimed his innocence. The detectives tried every trick they knew, but Spaggiari remained calm. While the interrogation continued, police raided the cottage Spaggiari shared with his wife. The search turned up illegal weapons and dynamite. The discovery gave the detectives the upper hand in the interrogation.
They tried to make a deal, an absolutely illegal blackmail. They told him, either you confess that you are the brains behind the heist of the century, or we charge your wife with illegal possession of firearms and put her in prison for many years.
To save his wife, Spaggiari finally confessed to the crime. He detailed exactly how he put together the plunder. The idea came to him 2 years earlier. A neighbor who worked as a manager at the bank let it slip that the vault had no alarm. Spaggiari went to the bank and rented a lockbox. He photographed the interior of the vault and made extensive notes. It would take hours to break into the thousands of lockboxes. He needed a quiet, unnoticeable way of getting in. Fortunately for Spaggiari, Nice had an extensive underground sewer system. For 6 weeks, he endured the stench of the rat-infested maze, trying to find the sewer line that led to the bank. To combat the odor, he smoked or chewed on a cigar. Finally, posing as a contractor, he went to City Hall and obtained a map of the sewer system. With this help, he found the sewer branch that ran nearest to the bank. At its closest point, it still left 30 feet of tunnel to be dug. Spaggiari now had the plan, but not the means to achieve it. So he traveled to nearby Marseille and met with the city's organized crime leaders. The ambitious plan intrigued the mob bosses. In return for a cut of the take, they agreed to provide all the equipment and manpower. Some of the sewer rats were engineers, others electricians. But most of all, the rats were diggers. Every other night in May and June, they went to work. During the digging, Spaggiari set up an elaborate lookout system. With sentries and radios, the tunnelers could be warned and escape in just over a minute. They dug in teams of 3. It was grueling, back-breaking work. The tight space was poorly ventilated and hot. Finally, one of the diggers succumbed to the stress and passed out. Spaggiari reacted like a good manager. He set up a strict schedule. Each team of tunnelers would work only 1 day out of 3. They would dig for 10 minutes, then rest for another 10. There was even a doctor on call in case of emergencies. They strung a half-mile of electrical cable to a nearby underground garage. They now had electricity in the tunnel with which to run ventilators and lights. The sewer rats dug on night after night. Finally, in the first week of July, after 9 weeks of digging, the sewer rats reached the wall of the vault. But they still faced 12 inches of reinforced concrete. They needed jackhammers and drills to break through. Spaggiari feared the noise would be heard from the street above. His fears proved groundless. They would get halfway through the vault wall that night. Next weekend, they would be in. Friday, July 16th. Well after the bank had closed for the weekend, the rats began to move. They carried their equipment on inflatable rafts through the sewer lines to the tunnel opening. They still had 6 inches of reinforced concrete to break through. These last inches proved to be the toughest. The drilling took far longer than Spaggiari had planned. It was 2 a.m. Sunday morning when the rats finally entered the vault. The first order of business was welding the steel door to its frame. This way, if someone tried to enter the vault, Spaggiari and his crew would have time to escape. Then the rats went to work. They started cutting into the security boxes one by one, and what they found exceeded their dreams. Jewelry, silver goblets, and gold in all forms. Government securities, bearer bonds, cash, stock certificates, and banknotes. On Sunday evening, they broke for dinner. Spaggiari provided a gourmet feast: goose liver pate, sausage, soups, cheese and fish, as well as wine. And they ate their delicacies like kings on gold plates found in one of the boxes. Armed couriers had come to make a night deposit. Pennies from heaven. The plunder continued uninterrupted through the night. The thieves spent a total of 27 hours in the vault. At 5 a.m. Monday morning, Spaggiari declared that it was time to go. The bank would open in less than 4 hours.
When they were ready to leave the vault, Spaggiari got a bright idea. There we see the poet, the artist, the lover of books and writing. Without asking anyone, because the gangsters would laugh at it, he wrote that famous sentence that helped to build his legend. Without weapons, without hate, and without violence.
The sewer rats were long gone by the time the bank officers tried to open the vault. They had broken into a little less than 400 boxes, 10% of the 4,000 total. But it was more than enough. No one expected that Spaggiari would receive more than a 2-year sentence if he fully cooperated with authorities. The victims had been reimbursed by the insurance companies, and the crime had been non-violent. But Spaggiari was determined not to spend a day behind bars for the heist of the century. He cooperated with the authorities, giving them most of the details of the crime, but he never revealed the names of his accomplices. For 20 weeks, Spaggiari met every Thursday with the instruction judge, a French court officer that serves as a combination of grand jury and prosecutor. On the 10th of May, 1977, in the last meeting before his trial, Spaggiari gave the instruction judge 3 pieces of paper with drawings of the Nice sewers. When the judge looked confused, Spaggiari offered his assistance. Attorney Jacques Perrat, presently the mayor of Nice, represented Spaggiari during this time.
He just naturally stood up. He walked around the judge's desk, got behind him, and he said, "Voilà, we started from here, and we did this, this, and that, and finally arrived there." The judge said, "Good, very good." And Albert, very calmly, started back for his seat. Then, all of a sudden, he opened the window, and in 1/10 of a second, he disappeared.
The authorities never recaptured Spaggiari, nor did they recover any of his share of the money. He did, however, send $600 in cash to the owner of the car whose roof he landed on.
And Spaggiari has now topped the crime of the century with the escape of the century.
Of his accomplices, 3 were acquitted, and 3 found guilty and sentenced to 5 years. Spaggiari himself lived the rest of his life on the run, taunting the police with letters and appearances in magazines. His wife, Audie, didn't join her husband in exile. She remained in Nice, where she continued to work as a nurse. In the end, the mastermind behind the heist of the century died of lung cancer in 1989.